Aaliyah had worked at Sunny's Diner for years, never imagining that one ordinary evening would turn into an unforgettable moment, one that involved standing up for Steph Curry. No amount of preparation could have readied her for what unfolded next. The evening shift at Sunny's Diner was usually predictable. At 29 years old, Aaliyah had mastered the rhythm of the small-town eatery, greeting every customer with her warm smile and making them feel at home. Located in a quiet part of Berkeley, near San Francisco, the diner was a cozy retreat for older locals who came in to enjoy coffee, pie, and nostalgic conversations, often revolving around basketball. For Aaliyah, Sunny's was more than a workplace. It was her comfort zone, a place where she knew every regular's order by heart. But tonight, that familiar routine was about to change forever. The jingle of the diner's entrance bell signaled a new arrival. Aaliyah glanced up, expecting to see one of the usual patrons, but her heart skipped a beat. Steph Curry. Yes, the Steph Curry, the Golden State Warriors superstar, one of the most celebrated athletes in the world. For a moment, Aaliyah froze, struggling to believe her eyes. Dressed casually in a hoodie and sneakers, Curry looked like he was trying to stay low-key. But even in simple attire, his presence commanded the room. The regulars at the counter turned toward him, whispering in hushed excitement. Some even craned their necks, trying to confirm if it was really him. Aaliyah's pulse quickened. She had watched him dominate the court countless times, but never imagined he would step into her quiet little diner. Despite the butterflies in her stomach, she gathered her composure and walked over, flashing her signature warm smile. "Good evening. What can I get for you tonight?" Curry looked up, his kind eyes meeting hers. A friendly smile spread across his face. "Just a coffee black, and maybe a slice of whatever pie you've got." "Coming right up," Aaliyah replied, her voice steady. As she prepared his order, she could feel the buzz in the diner. The regulars murmured among themselves, some smiling in awe, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Placing the coffee and pie in front of him, she tried to act normal. "Here you go. Enjoy." "Thanks," Steph said, flashing another appreciative smile before turning his gaze toward the window. As Aaliyah stole a glance at him, she noticed something unassuming about his demeanor. Despite his fame, he seemed lost in thought, perhaps even a little tired. But not everyone in the diner shared her admiration. Sitting at the counter was Earl, an older regular and a lifelong Sacramento Kings fan, the rival team of the Golden State Warriors. Earl was known for his bluntness and, at times, his harsh opinions. Aaliyah admired Curry, not just for his talent on the court, but for his philanthropic work off of it. But as she watched Earl rise from his seat, her excitement quickly turned to unease. He approached Curry's table, arms crossed, his voice gruff and direct. "Excuse me, aren't you that basketball guy, Steph Curry?" Curry looked up, offering a polite smile. "Yes, that's me." Earl scoffed, shaking his head. "I've been reading about you," he said, his tone edged with skepticism. "You make millions, but what do you actually do for folks who need it? Heard you're pretty stingy with all that cash." A heavy silence fell over the diner. Aaliyah, who was clearing plates at a nearby table, froze mid-step. She turned to Curry, watching his calm expression. He didn't seem fazed or offended, just composed. "I try to give back where I can," he replied evenly. "I've supported education programs, built basketball courts for kids, and helped fund charities." Earl scoffed again. "Sounds like a PR stunt to me. You big shots only care about your image." The murmurs in the diner grew louder. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. A surge of indignation rose in Aaliyah. Earl's words were misinformed and unfair. and she couldn't just stand by and listen. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward. "Earl," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside. "That's not true." The diner fell silent, all eyes turning toward her. "Steph Curry has done more than most people could dream of," she continued. "He's given scholarships to students who couldn't afford college, donated to disaster relief efforts, and supported mental health programs." Earl narrowed his eyes. "And you believe all that? How do you know he's not just doing it for the headlines?" Aaliyah didn't hesitate. "Because actions speak louder than words," she countered. "I've read about the kids whose lives have changed because of his foundation. He doesn't have to do any of that, but he does, because he cares." Curry looked at her, surprise and gratitude flickering across his face. Aaliyah took a deep breath, her confidence growing. "We live in a world where people with the means don't always step up," she continued. "But when someone like Steph does, it's not fair to tear them down." The diner buzzed again, some patrons moved by her words, while others remained skeptical. Earl huffed and returned to his seat, muttering under his breath. But the damage was done. Mr. Sullivan, the diner's owner, stepped out from the kitchen, his expression dark. "Aaliyah," he said sharply, motioning her over. She approached, her heart sinking. "What were you thinking?" he asked in a low voice. "You don't argue with customers, especially not regulars like Earl." Aaliyah swallowed hard. "I wasn't arguing," she replied, her voice trembling. "I was standing up for someone who didn't deserve to be treated that way." Mr. Sullivan shook his head. "This is a business, not a debate club. Earl and the other regulars keep this place running. If they're upset, we lose their loyalty. I can't have that." He paused, then sighed. "I think it's best if you find another job." The words hit like a punch to the gut. "You're firing me? For defending someone?" Mr. Sullivan's tone was final. "I'll give you a few days to transition." Tears welled up, but Aaliyah held her head high, refusing to break in front of him. She glanced at Curry, who had risen to his feet, watching the exchange with a look of regret. Though the night hadn't ended as expected, Aaliyah knew one thing for sure. She had stood up for what she believed in, and in that moment, that was enough. As Aaliyah gathered her belongings, she heard a soft voice behind her. "I'm sorry." She turned to see Steph Curry, his expression filled with regret. "Thank you for standing up for me. You didn't have to do that, but it meant a lot." Aaliyah managed a weak smile. "You're welcome." That night, as she lay in bed, the events of the evening played over and over in her mind. The sting of humiliation was still fresh. She had loved working at Sonny's Diner, the camaraderie with the regulars, the comforting routine of brewing coffee, serving pancakes, and hearing familiar voices. But now, she was out of a job, all because she had spoken up for someone she admired. Aaliyah had thought that doing the right thing mattered, but now, she wasn't so sure. It felt like the world didn't care about what was right or wrong. The next morning, Aaliyah woke up feeling empty. Her usual enthusiasm was gone, replaced by a weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. Sonny's Diner had been her safe space, a place of routine, laughter, and familiarity. Now, it was just a memory. She had lost everything in a single moment, simply because she couldn't stand by and watch someone be unfairly criticized. But life didn't stop. Rent was due. Bills needed to be paid. Reluctantly, she prepared to head back to the diner one last time to collect her final paycheck. The thought of stepping inside again made her stomach churn. She could already imagine the whispers, the disapproving glances, but she had no choice. The morning air was crisp as she walked through the quiet streets of San Francisco. The golden glow of the rising sun bathed the city, but Aaliyah couldn't appreciate it. Her mind was clouded. Her heart was heavy. Still, she resolved to keep her head high. She had nothing to be ashamed of. She had stood up for the truth, even when it cost her. As she approached Sunny's diner, something unusual caught her eye. A sleek black SUV was parked outside, its polished exterior gleaming in the sunlight. It looked out of place against the humble, slightly weathered diner. Aaliyah hesitated, confused. Then, she pushed open the door. Inside, the usual hum of conversation was gone. Instead, an uneasy silence filled the room. Her eyes scanned the diner and widened in shock. Steph Curry sat casually in one of the booths. Despite his relaxed posture, he carried an air of quiet confidence that commanded attention. Dressed in jeans, a sweatshirt, and a baseball cap, he looked effortlessly casual. But there was no mistaking his presence. Behind the counter, Mr. Sullivan stood frozen, his face a mixture of nerves and confusion. The regulars were unusually quiet, their eyes flicking between Steph and Aaliyah. The tension in the room was palpable. Then, Steph stood. His voice was warm, calm, and inviting. "Aaliyah, can we talk?" Aaliyah's heart pounded as she nodded and crossed the room. She felt every pair of eyes on her, but for once, she didn't care. Sliding into the seat across from Steph, she tried to steady her racing thoughts. Steph looked at her, his gaze sincere. "I couldn't stop thinking about what happened last night," he began. "You stood up for me when you didn't have to, and I respect that, more than I can say." Aaliyah blinked, unsure how to respond. "I just thought you deserved someone to stand up for you," she said quietly, her voice almost trembling. Steph nodded. "And that's exactly why I'm here," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "What you did took courage. It showed me the kind of person you are, someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's hard." Aaliyah tilted her head, confusion mingling with disbelief. "I don't understand," she said. "Why are you here?" Steph smiled, his expression kind, yet determined. "My foundation is expanding. We're launching new programs to support underprivileged kids, improve access to education, and create opportunities for people who need a second chance. We need people who are passionate about making a difference." He paused, then said, "People like you." Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Steph nodded. "Completely. I want you to join the team." He smiled. "It's not waiting tables, but it's a chance to be part of something bigger, to use your voice and your heart to help others." For a moment, Aaliyah sat in stunned silence. The weight of his words, the sheer improbability of this offer, left her speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes as the reality sank in. She had lost her job, but in its place, she was being offered an opportunity beyond anything she had ever imagined. "I don't know what to say," she whispered finally, her voice thick with emotion. Steph grinned. "Say yes." A small laugh escaped her through her tears. Then, she nodded firmly. "Yes. Absolutely yes." Steph reached across the table and shook her hand, sealing the deal. Around them, the diner remained eerily quiet. The same people who had judged her the night before now sat stunned into silence. Aaliyah's eyes briefly met Earl's. His expression was a mix of disbelief and, perhaps, begrudging respect. Behind the counter, Mr. Sullivan stood stiffly, his jaw clenched. There was a hint of guilt in his eyes, but Aaliyah didn't dwell on it. Her focus was on the future. As Steph rose to leave, he turned back to her. "I'll have someone from my team reach out today to get things started. Thank you again for everything. It meant more than you know." The bell above the door chimed as he walked out. the sound marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Aaliyah took a deep breath, then turned to the counter to collect her final paycheck. Mr. Sullivan handed it to her, his voice grudging, yet remorseful. "I still think you shouldn't have done what you did last night, but I'm sorry for how I treated you." Aaliyah met his gaze steadily. "You taught me a valuable lesson," she said simply. "Sometimes, standing up for what's right is worth more than staying quiet to keep a job." With that, she stepped into the sunlight, her heart light with hope. In the weeks that followed, Aaliyah joined Steph Curry's foundation and poured herself into work that felt meaningful and fulfilling. She traveled to communities in need, helped organize educational programs, and met countless individuals whose lives were transformed by their efforts. For the first time, she felt like her voice and actions truly mattered. Looking back, she realized losing her job at Sonny's Diner wasn't the end she feared. It was the beginning of something greater. One chance encounter had changed everything.